Welcome back to Neuroconversant Leadership, where we talk about effective communication, especially in the STEM workplace. I'm Jeremy Dorn, and I love helping engineers become great leaders. I have a very special guest with us today. It is Dr. Tom Collins. He is an academic pediatric cardiologist, which is a mouthful. He's a professor of pediatrics. He hosts the Science of Leadership podcast, and he's got a book coming out. Tom, welcome.
Thanks, Jeremy, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. Tell us a little bit about your podcast, because these are obviously already podcast listeners, so they may be interested in yours as well. What do you talk about on that?
Sure, yeah. So as the name implies, the Science of Leadership, there are a lot of leadership podcasts out there. We really bring together a practitioner's sort of view as well as the research. So really trying to bring together the science behind it. Why is it that this particular leadership concept is important? How can it help you be a better leader? And we do that typically through conversations with really experienced high-level leaders. I've had numerous four-star generals on the show, CEOs of companies, university presidents, things of that nature. So these are people who have led at pretty high scale and are experts at it. And then blending that with their stories, and some really exciting stories, as you might imagine, with the science. And so I think it's something that a lot of folks can benefit from.
Are there any surprises when, a number of people may have certain things that they talk about or do in leadership, and the research may show something a little bit different? Do you come across that ever?
That does happen. I mean, I think with any research, you got to take it in the context in which it was conducted, right? And the sample, right? So when we talk about research, we're talking about who are the people or what is the setting where you did the research. You may do research, let's say, in China, and that research is important and valuable and demonstrates certain things in that cultural context, but that may not necessarily translate to, let's say, Greece or Australia. And so it's always a matter of how does this play with the culture that you're talking about and the place in which you're working? So that is one consideration that always leads to potential differences between a given leader's experience and perspective and the science. So that does occur, but actually, for the most part, they're all consonant, if you will. They all flow together.
It's interesting. I've had people push back on things periodically when I'm coaching, and a lot of times they push back because I'm saying something that's not the way they've always done it. And it's just a change. And then, when you dig into it, I'm like, well, has it been working for you? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, then let's explore this change. It's interesting what people push back on.
Yeah, well, I think you just hit on a word that's really important, right, is change. Folks don't like the idea of change. There's fear. We may not call it fear, but there's some degree of cognitive fear that comes with change because it's different, it's unknown, and even in studies, people, and like if you look at what's called toxic leaders, people will know that a leader is toxic, yet because they know the situation, they will just stay with that situation instead of moving toward something that's unknown to them. So there's some fascinating psychology that comes with these things.
Yeah, there's even a saying for it: "The devil you know is better than the devil you don't."
Yeah, like, exactly.
Well, what if the other thing's not a devil? It might be better than that, but
right. Yeah. Well, I just recently I was doing a podcast with a four-star admiral, and I referred to it as people sometimes prefer the devil they know to the angel they don't know.
Nice.
So it is fascinating.
Yeah, that's a good one. You have done studies and interviewed a lot of four-star generals and or admirals. Tell us about how did that study come up and why, and what are some of the things you gleaned from it?
Yeah. So I was on the side. I decided to do a master's degree in leadership a few years ago, and during that, I've read hundreds of leadership books, and And so I got this idea for a book that I would love to read, and that would be the leadership wisdom of four-star generals and admirals. But it doesn't exist, not in the shape that I would want. I would want it to be done scientifically and rigorously, and it would blend their stories with the concepts and advice that they might have on how to lead well. And so I decided, well, it's on me to do it because I do research and I write and I came up with the idea. So I started interviewing. I interviewed 51, just for, sort of level set. There are only about 250 living four-star U.S. four-star generals or admirals. And so I interviewed 51 of them, and that's nobody's ever done anything remotely close to that. And took all of their information, all the things that they said. I asked them all the same 4 questions and asked them to give me examples of how these things played out and just incredible stories and things, and analyzed all that scientifically, and then created a framework of leadership that came from that. And as a result, have written a book that's in the works and aiming for this summer for launch, hopefully.
I love it. What's the title?
The title at this time is The 4 Stars of Leadership. We'll see what, publisher types say, but the 4 stars of leadership, and those are character, competence, caring, and communication. So hitting on that communication idea.
I love it. And you interviewed 51 of them. Is that one per state plus Puerto Rico, or is it just coincidence?
Yeah, that's just coincidence. Certainly, it's a highly guarded guild. A lot of these folks don't even have an online presence because they're at such a level in society, and they've been in situations that put them at enduring threat moving forward. And so getting in contact with these people is extraordinarily difficult. And once I was able to do that, I had this cascade where they would help me then contact others.
Great.
And so it was just whomever I could get to agree to be part of it. So, yeah.
I love it. It's amazing how many people I've talked to who have written a book, and the impetus was that they wanted to read a book, and it wasn't there. So then they're like, I guess I'll just write it.
Yeah.
Can you repeat for us the 4 pillars that you had talked about and how those came up when you were asking questions? You said there were 4 questions for each. Did you have these pillars in mind, or did these pillars come from the conversations?
Yeah, so this is a type of research that we call qualitative research. And so basically you go through the process, ask the same questions of a given group of people. So in this scenario, it was, what are the 3 most important leadership lessons you learned across your career? And most of these careers are 40 years long. Can you give me an example of each one of those? The second was a leadership lesson you learned the hard way, right? Like you screwed it up, okay? The third was, how do you want to be remembered as a leader? And that really gets at legacy, what's really important to them as they look back on their careers. And the final was, what are 5 leadership maxims you always try to keep in mind? And so that gives you more of the practical, like what are they doing day in, day out? What are they thinking as they're going through this process? And so then I asked them all those, and we recorded all those and then analyzed them, transcribed them, analyzed the words, used software to help bring out some of those things. But you look for recurring, what we call themes, right? And so somebody might analyze what we're talking about right now, just the words that we're using. And they may say, well, they talked about leadership and they talked about communication and these sorts of things, right? And so looking for what are they saying big picture, and then what are they really saying here with this thing? What's the main point that they're making? So you analyze all that and you put them in buckets, and then you see what really bubbles up the most. And so the things that bubble up the most, and I didn't go into this with any preconceived notion, okay? I did not say, okay, I'm going to force these people to talk about character or competence or whatever. I'm going to just ask them, what's important from your perspective? And so character, everybody talked about character in some way, either expressly or it was very obvious by the stories that they conveyed and the actions taken by themselves and others, that character was valuable and highly important. Competence, knowing what you're doing and being good at it. Then caring, which may strike some people who've never been in the military as odd that 4-star generals or admirals would talk about caring, but that was highly important. And then communication. Doesn't matter how good you are at all those other three things. If you can't actually communicate with people, you're not going to be effective as a leader. So those all just sort of bubbled out and created the pillars, as you say.
So going back through them, the first one was character. Can you quickly just explain what character is and if there were any examples or pertinent things that made that pop up?
Yeah. Yeah. So practically every one of them, as I said, expressly talked about character. Character is who you are. Okay. Like really who you are. We're talking about things like honest is virtues. Okay. What comprise you as a person? Honor, integrity, courage, compassion, all these sorts of things. And so that's character. People want to have leaders of character because character is something you invest trust in. If you don't trust your leader, you're not going to follow him, right? And so you have to have character for people to be influenced by you. So that's generally the idea of character, in a nutshell.
And how does one show character? Is it something that you can proactively show to the people on your team, or is it something that they're going to pick up and there's nothing you can really do to push it? They're just going to sense it.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that character is not something that you can fake because if you do, that'll come out. And that'll just undermine the whole concept of character, right? Like that's a part of it. Character, in my mind, character sort of exudes from somebody. Like you know somebody is compassionate by watching them. They don't have to tell you, I'm compassionate, right? You know somebody keeps their word by the fact that they say something and they do what they say, yeah. Right? They don't have to say, oh, by the way, I'm honest. I'm a person of integrity. Like that, just, you see that, right? I think, and so in the writing, as I was going through this and analyzing the things that people were saying, it transpired that I recognized, and I haven't seen this before in the literature, that there are really kind of two types of character. There's the things that are inwardly focused, right? So integrity. That's about you, Jeremy, holding to your values and doing what you say you will do when nobody's around, right? It's that kind of thing. There are other virtues that go with that, but that's an example. Then there are those that are outwardly focused, like compassion. You're compassionate to somebody else, and somebody else sees that. So the internally directed integrity, those sort of honor, those sorts of things, aren't necessarily things of character that other people can see. They may manifest in a way that people could infer it. But the others are things that transpire externally that people can see. So there are two types of virtues in my analysis when it comes to character. You had asked, what might be an example of character that I got during this study, and man, there's so many. Okay. One I'll share just because it's just amazing, and it's honors General Jim Mattis, who I hold as just a tremendous person of integrity and character. And so I got to interview General Mattis, but I also interviewed the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Charles Krulak. And so General Krulak spontaneously told me this story as an example of character. Every year at Christmas, General Krulak he and his wife and other people would make like hundreds of dozens of cookies. And they would take them all around D.C. and Northern Virginia to all the Marine Corps posts. And anybody that was standing watch, was on duty on Christmas, he would personally take them a plate of cookies that he made, right? And so he finally gets finished and goes to the main sort of headquarters site at Quantico. And he walks in, and there's a sergeant there who's on duty. And the sergeant snaps to attention, good morning, sir, and that sort of thing. And Krulak says, hey, here's a plate of cookies for you. Really appreciate what you're doing. Who's the officer of the day? That means the officer who's there present over the operation. usually is a captain, could be a major. And the sergeant says, General Mattis, sir. And General Mattis was the guy who's over the whole base. Okay, like he's not going to be there on Christmas taking this duty of of a person at that level. And Krulak says, no, I don't mean who's in charge. I mean who's the officer of the day. And the Marine says, sir, it's General Jim Mattis. And Krulak is starting to get a little agitated. And he says, look, I'm going to make this real simple. You see that cot over there? Who's going to be sleeping in that cot tonight? And the sergeant, getting a little agitated too, says, sir, it is Brigadier General Jim Mattis. And by this point, Krulak's about to lose his stuff, right? Like he's about to go off. And then he hears clink, 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 clink coming up the hall. And he recognizes, that sounds like a sword hitting somebody's leg. And around the corner comes Brigadier General Jim Mattis, dressed in his Marine Corps blues, sword, the whole deal, like full regalia, right? Walks in. And Krulak's like, Jim, with all due respect, what the hell are you doing here? And he said, I'm the officer of the day. He said, well, I see that, but why are you here? He said, well, I'm a bachelor. The guy who was supposed to be scheduled as a wife and 2 kids, he should be home on Christmas. I don't need to be at home on Christmas. And Krulak just marveled, and he said, reality is that unless I showed up that day, I would have never known that Jim Mattis had done that, right? So that's character, right? Like he did that because it was, so the 3 things about this is, when you're a leader especially, doing the right thing for the right reasons in the right way. So you got to get all 3 of those to really nail it, okay? And he did that, right? Like he did the right thing in the right way. He wasn't telling everybody or anything like that, for the right reasons. So that's an example, a little teaser.
That's a good one. I love it. What was the second pillar?
So the second is competence. It's actually knowing what you're doing, being good at it, right? Like, especially when it comes to military operations, you want to know that this person's going to get you home. You're not going to find, you're not going to follow somebody who's an imbecile. So that's the second.
When I am dealing with people, very often they are promoted and they don't necessarily know as much as the people who are reporting to them. And very often that causes the manager a lot of stress because they feel like they need to know everything that everyone else knows. And you talk about competence. So can you talk a little bit about how important it is to know as much as everyone else knows? Or can there be people on your team who know more than you as long as you're good at leading them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy way to think about this is to think about, what if you're a really good leader and you keep scaling up? It was impossible for Alfred Sloan, right, who created, essentially, he made GM become what we know of as GM, right? It was impossible for Alfred Sloan to know how to assemble a vehicle, how to do an audit sheet, how to create marketing, how to do all these things, right? So the reality is no human is able to know everything that needs to be known. And if you spend all your time trying to do that, you're not going to be effective doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing, which is leading those people to be effective, right? And so I think that's a concept that came out in a recent episode. It's also in the book, is do only what only you can do, right? Like, you have all these other people to do their jobs. Make sure they have the equipment and the capability to do their job, and then don't get in their way of doing their job. Your job is to lower mountains and raise valleys, remove the obstacles and give them the resources they need to do a good job. So I think that's the issue, is we have a lot of folks who lose that. They get comfortable in doing what they used to do, right? Like, so Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. They were really good as an engineer, but now they're not an engineer anymore, in a sense. They're a leader of this group of people who have some engineers and some whatever they may be, right? So I think that's the key there.
Yeah, it's a hard transition for new managers to make, and it's something that I always address, because they took pride in their deliverable, and their deliverable
Right.
was a drawing or whatever it was. I'm like, your deliverable is now your team. So you have to find a way to take pride in other people's productivity rather than your own. But it's a shift.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's one that a lot of people have a huge difficulty making.
Yeah.
Huge difficulty.
And what's pillar number 3?
So pillar number 3 is caring, right? People want to know that they matter. We all want to feel like we matter, that people care about us. In especially in U.S. So in the U.S. and Western cultures, we try to have this arm's length or professionalism, we call it. Um, and and I don't think that not caring about people is professionalism, right? Like fundamentally. So it gets to trust. If someone doesn't care about you, you're not going to follow them. You're not going to trust them and have the relationship that you need to have success as a group working together. And so caring is a really important pillar that often, especially in U.S. professional quote unquote contexts, we leave out.
I think a lot of times, especially newer managers, are afraid that showing the caring will prevent them from making hard decisions that may need to be made down the road. Is there a way that your studies found that people can balance the two things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately the key there is prioritization within your role and establishing that, I think, on the front end. Look, mission first, right? This is why we exist as an entity, whatever organization you're in. We exist for this reason. So we have to pursue that first. In concert with that is the other folks, the people that you're leading. But they need to know, look, I care about you. I want to develop you, help you be the best that you can be. And that includes knowing more about you, perhaps, than just, you know, where you sit in the office or those sorts of things. And so being able to lay those things out on the front end. Look, mission first. So if you're not doing your job, we may have to rethink this thing. But I think that when you establish those things on the front end, my goal is for us to have a legitimate relationship, but mission first. I think folks usually will understand that, and they actually appreciate it.
Yeah, what I've found is that if you set expectations up front, even if they're not necessarily what, the person working for you would want to have, if they know what it is and you stick to it, they're much happier than someone who is unclear, even if they're unclear in a way that benefits the employee more.
That lack of setting expectations, if I had to name one thing that probably most people do poorly, it is that, right? Like telling people what's expected of them. Mm-hmm. Admiral Snuffy Smith said, if you don't tell people what's expected of them, you will not get it.
That's perfect. Perfectly said. And pillar number 4.
Pillar number 4 is communication. You got to be able to convey to people, A, those expectations we just hit on, mm-hmm. B, overall goals, all these other things, right? Communication isn't just words, and people have done studies on this, and whether it's nonverbals or just the tone, right? The inflection, the timbre of our voice. There's so many things about communication. And so recognizing that and recognizing that needs to be aligned, right? Like what I say needs to match how I say it, because if there's dissonance between my words and just my facial countenance or my tone, people will tend to pay attention to the nonverbal, yep. Right? And so communication is really, really important. In fact, General Les Lyles, 4-star general in the Air Force, who has been instrumental in NASA and so forth. He is legitimately a rocket scientist. But I asked him, what are the 3 most important leadership lessons you learned across your career? And he said, Communicate, communicate, communicate.
Nice. How much does it translate from four-star generals leadership to corporations that are outside of the military? Do you think that all of the lessons translate? Do you think some of them do? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that 100% they all translate. If you can name me some corporation where character, competence, caring, communication aren't important to exceptional success, then I'd be interested in hearing it. But I actually did a similar study where I was at Stanford University as a faculty member there in the School of Medicine, and I interviewed 40 professors in the School of Medicine there, and I asked them about what it takes to be successful in academic medicine. And one of those big themes that came out was this idea of leadership. And so we dug into that and looked at it. And I just recently published a paper that shows that those four pillars came out exactly the same in academic medicine. Okay. And I've had so many people tell me in my career, well, leadership in medicine is different than in the military. And that's because they don't know very much about the military and even less about leadership. Great leadership is great leadership, I would say. And so what happens is people see, Saving Private Ryan or Platoon, and most of those depict a command and control situation where everything's hitting the fan because we're all interested in violence and explosions and all that. So it's always in the heat of battle where somebody says, do X, and you're expected to do X, right? But the reality is they don't ever tell you about the 6 months or 5 years that led up to do X, and you jump to do X. If you look at these things and pick out, say, okay, which one of those don't you need in your line of work? There's not one.
Yeah, hopefully not.
Yeah.
And this is such a great conversation, but unfortunately, we need to start wrapping up. So before I ask you those three questions, can you tell people how they can learn more about you and or reach out?
Yeah, sure. So with regard to our podcast, you can find us on, YouTube or any of the audio platforms, Science of Leadership. And so you can tune in there. We've got a lot of great, it still blows my mind, the people that I get to talk to. We put out every week, usually on Tuesday, and it's really gaining a lot of traction and making a positive impact from what I can tell. Additionally, our company called The Four Stars, and it's fourstarleaders.com, where they could get in touch that way too.
Perfect. I will put a link in the show notes so that it will be easier for people to find you. So my three questions, starting with travel, where's a place you've been and loved and a place you've not yet been but want to go?
Yeah, so been a lot of places. The place that comes to mind immediately is Srinagar, India. And so that's in the western part of Kashmir. And there's a lake there that is really large, and they have these phenomenal houseboats. So this was in 1999 when I was there. And you just stay out. It's picturesque, just phenomenal. So that's one place that I would recommend to folks. Hard to get there, but phenomenal. A place I would like to go to, we're going to be going to this summer, Machu Picchu.
Oh,
I'm
nice.
so excited about that. Yeah. I've been wanting to go there for years.
You are the first guest to have said India as their favorite place, but I think tourism there is about to go up from your recommendation. Who do you think is a great communicator? And it can be a famous person or just someone in your own life.
I think I'll go back to Admiral Snuffy Smith on this one because I learned something from him, and it's not what's said that's important, it's what's heard. And so I think that he understood, and he passed away end of November 2023, but I think he understood communication on a level that until he said that, it never even, that was so foreign to me. So I would say hats off to Admiral Smith.
So then the last question is, what is one piece of communication advice that you think we can all benefit from?
Yeah, I will go back to what I just said. There are a lot of things that in the communication process, and I kind of lay that out in my book. things that disrupt it and can cause us to have difficulty. But at the end of the day, if I'm trying to communicate something to you, I've got an idea and I'm trying to get it into your mind in the same form that's in my mind, right? That's the goal. Then it's on me to understand the context and the frame that you use and all those sorts of things, so that it's not what I say, it's what you hear. And if you can shift your mind to that, I think your communication capability will skyrocket.
Perfect. I love that one. That is a great piece of advice. Dr. Tom Collins, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, Jeremy, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Neuroconversant Leadership. If you found this beneficial, can you do me one small favor? It'll be quick, I promise. Can you go and give this podcast a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever it is that you listen before doing anything else? Unless you're driving. If you're driving, then I need you to keep driving. And then when you're done and parked, then go ahead and give me a review. Hopefully 5 stars, but whatever you are comfortable honestly giving. Thank you and have a great day.